once you move over here, you start building your life with your husband. Do you get into real estate right off the bat? The first job?
It was my first job, but I didn't get on it right away. It took me a few years to find my bearing, adjust to the climate, adjust to the weather, adjust to many adjustments that I did. But it was after a few years, yes.
Yeah. And then the transition from real estate into public service. And you are as we were talking, there are many firsts here, but you were the first deputy mayor of Canada who's a Muslim woman and Pakistani,
yes,
if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. That's a very big accomplishment. And I'm sure there were lots of obstacles that you had to face and overcome along the way. What was that whole transition like?
I think the obstacle was myself. And when I started my journey as a ward councillor in the municipal political world, it was back in 2018. And the first obstacle for me was putting myself out there, right? I won that election, by the way, and it was a beautiful journey. But just the obstacle of getting over, knocking on someone's door and say, "Hi, I'm Maleeha Shahid. I'm here with a resume for you to elect me as a councillor for this ward. And I'd like to see your support." And then the questions would start, right? They would ask me all sorts of questions. Now imagine me 8 years younger, right? So, and then by the time I had knocked so many doors, I had lost a lot of weight and I had a ball cap on, and people thought this is some young woman who's trying to get their vote. And I heard all sorts of questions: who you are, where you came from, what do you do, and so on and so forth. But it was a beautiful process of going over that obstacle of introducing yourself to that ward, in that ward to 20,000 people, right? And knocking on every door day and night, and putting yourself out there, putting myself out there was something of an obstacle. And I overcame that. And people really, a majority of people, that's how I got elected, received me very nicely. Most of the people received me very kindly. And that's the fabric of Canada, the acceptance of it all. I mean, I was an immigrant, yes. I was the first of many things. And I think I was also the first South Asian, Muslim, Pakistani woman who was elected as a ward councillor, if not Toronto, if not GTHA, but at least in entire Durham region, right? And I don't have the stats in front of me, and I don't want to make up the stuff as well, but that was the first for my town, and people were curious. Where did she come from? What is her background? Does she have a family? What is her why? And why is she running? And they all asked me in a very kind manner, most of them, and I answered it, and perhaps that's how I got my support.
But what was your why?
Well, my why was very simple. In the neighborhood that I lived in town of Whitby, because it was a new subdivision, there wasn't any sidewalks or a traffic light, and I was advocating that. And while I was advocating, it was in the process of getting it, and it was in process of 5 or 6 years away. And that's what I was advocating for it to be sooner, because at that intersection, many, many years ago, I've lived in Whitby almost now 19 years ago, so I'm talking about good 13, 14, or maybe more years ago, somebody had passed away at that intersection just when I had moved to that particular neighborhood. So I was advocating for that. So when I moved into my new home that I live right now, and that's where I started my municipal political journey, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to be the councillor. I'm going to advocate it. But I learned a lot from that, of how the advocacy is done and how the budget process works with bringing an intersection into making it safe and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of learning and overcoming the obstacles, which we can be our own obstacles,
self-imposed obstacles, yeah. And then, a lot of us, we want to take on really big challenges, and, we're motivated in the moment. For example, somebody passed away on that intersection and you took it upon yourself to do something about it. Now, I do see a lot of people doing that, but they never see it through. In your case, you saw how overwhelming and intimidating it was to be a public servant, how many rules there were, how many obstacles, I mean, as somebody, as an immigrant, but you still stuck with it. So there had to be a larger than you why for it, right? I don't think it was just limited to that intersection. Like, how did you see the long-term vision of, I wanna serve my people?
That was my only why.
Yeah.
To be very honest, I talk about green lights in my book, and in that it is a book by Matthew McConaughey, and he talks about the vision was simple, right? For me, the vision was simple: public service. I want to help. I want to be a resource for someone's to overcome their obstacle or help them out. Simple. Where I am at, those things were like green lights. They came towards me and I started embracing them. And that's what it is. Where I'm going to land, I don't know. Yeah. But the idea is, Umer, when I started my real estate career, I did not know that ever if I want to have a political life. When I started my political life, I never knew that I'm going to pick up paintbrushes and start painting. I've never painted in my life. But I started it. When things got a little heavy and world started spiraling, I picked up my paintbrushes and started painting. I never painted to sell my artwork or donate my artwork. I painted for myself, right? But when I lost my federal election in 2021, that was an opportunity that was brought to me. Maleeha, would you like to run for us, for a political party? And I said yes. But what happened was I didn't win. That was fine, fair and square. But what came out of it was a beautiful book that I wrote, right? And those were the green lights that I started embracing. And I was like, you know what? What public service actually means is you stick to your values. My values have always been kindness and compassion. And how can you spread that, right? That's all that there is to it. When we talk about embracing or goal reaching, sometimes your path is not clear, but your values are always clear of what exactly you are, who I am. That will never change. And that is what I believe in strongly.
Yeah. And I think that's what's gotten you so far, right? It's just having so much clarity around the values, because a lot of people don't know what they stand for.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest problem young people nowadays are facing, is they don't have clarity on what their principles are. They don't have clarity on what they want to stand for. And it's also a lot to do with fear of what other people will think and say. Yeah. And in your case, I'm sure you faced your fair share of, in Pakistan we say log kya kahenge, which means what will people say. So how did you deal with all of that?
Well, I think I still stew in that.
Yeah.
And it's very, very normal, and I think I acknowledge that more than often. What will people think, and what is uncertainty? And that's how I started my podcast. And I'm sorry, I'm just going on with what I started.
No, please.
But when I started, I had the idea to start my own podcast over a year ago. But I was like, what are you going to say? What if you have a mic slip? What if you have what if you say something and somebody's going to object about it? But the fact of the matter is, when you raise your bar higher, you will be exposed to two opinions, whether someone will like you, whether people will be meh, and the other one will be like, she's not my cup of tea. Yeah. And that will happen. This is a reality. And the sooner we embrace it, the better it is. And that's all that there is to it. You will have rejection. And not that the other person is unkind, it's just you did not have a mental in tuning, or you did not click with that person, but that's okay. And that is perfectly fine. The more we start living with the objectives or with the goals that we want to, the better it will be for us. It's called stoicism in some way or form, but I think it just gives us that freedom. And I learned that from someone. So when I started spiraling a lot right after my election that I had lost, I did seek someone who I spoke with often for my own personal growth. And this is what he kept on telling me. It doesn't matter what other people think. If other people's anger, other people's criticism makes you go crazy, then you have to work on yourself. And that is exactly what it is. I know where I stand, and I know it very well. And I know it more than ever. My path is clear to me, that I will always be on the path of kindness. I will always be on the path of compassion, and I will always be willing to help people and remove the I from the cause. And if somebody has an issue with me, then that's their problem, not mine. It's easier said than done. I will tell you that. But that's the path that I want to be. And that's what it is. I mean, when I started my podcast, it was January of this year. I sat on that podcast over 2 weeks. And the reason I sat on it was like, what if people don't like it? What if I hear people criticizing it? But then I heard it for the upteenth time, and I said, what's wrong with it?
Yeah.
Nothing. Nothing's wrong with it. And you know what? If there are some issues with it, something happens, then I will fix it the next time, or the next time, or the next time. And that's exactly what it is. Even with my book, I sat on it for over a month of, first, what will my husband say? And then somebody said, why don't you share it with him? And I said, yeah, easier said than done, right? But that's exactly what it is. These are the things that we overcome, right? These are the obstacles that are our own mental obstacles. But when your values are in check and you know exactly what the path that you're on, I believe that it becomes a little easier to embrace it.